So hey anime fans, the series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Spider-Woman. So let's start the series. A sleeping teenager was awakened by an older man's voice calling out, "Naruto Uzumaki." He moaned into his pillow and tried to go back asleep, but his father's firm voice cut through his attempt. "Get up, you got to go to school," he said. His blue eyes were half open, ready to close at any time, and his golden spiked hair sprang from the comfort of his cushion. A groan of exhaustion, muffled by his pillow soaked in drool. Yawn alright, I'm comin', Dad. He dragged his feet and shivered as he grudgingly got out of his warm bed, pausing briefly to gaze into his bedroom mirror. He scowled as he extended his fingers to trace the subtle scars that cover his face. When he was a young lad, it was difficult at first since he used to feel ashamed of the silver lines that adorned his face. In addition to a big single scar that ran through his left brow, there were precisely 6 lines that ran deep into his cheekbones. When he was younger, the blonde teenager was quite self-conscious of them, but now? Like his blue eyes and hair, they were simply a part of him. As another yawn escaped, Naruto's head swung in the direction of his adoptive father, scratching the back of his head. "Yo kid, you comin'?" "Yeah, I'm coming, Dad." Slumping wearily on the couch next his father, the scarred teenager moaned and glared at the guy. Aaron Davis was an African-American man in his early 30s who was tall and well-built. An adopted father who is proud. His lips are drawing back in a grin as he looks amusedly at his half-awake son. Too exhausted, Naruto let out a half-hearted sigh and turned to face the already turned-on television, asking, "What's with the look?" The news anchor's tirade about heroes and villains was standard fare. "Not much has changed." "Why'd you have to wake me up so early?" the wounded teen asked, taking a time to look away from the television and toward his adopted father. Naruto scowled as he learned that his father was departing. "You know how hard it is to wake you up. If I don't wake you now, you're not getting up, and I wanted to see you off before I left." The news caused him to sag a little in his chair. Aaron hesitated, then shrugged, pushed himself from the couch, and began to fumble in the kitchen, asking, "How long will the trip be this time?" While he tried to prepare breakfast for them both, pots and pans clanged. Seeing how saddened his son was by the news, he moved over and knelt down until he was eye level, warm brown meeting soulful blue. "Not sure yet. Possibly a week, maybe more. Hey man, it's a big job, but once I'm done, I'll be off for the next few months, and it'll just be you and me." Naruto grinned at his father as his head twitched. "Really?" Aaron nodded and ruffled his son's hair, delighted to see him smiling. Naruto gave Aaron a fist bump and nodded enthusiastically, saying, "As soon as I get back, I'll take you to your favorite restaurant." "Sounds cool." "Yeah, that sounds cool, Dad." With 2 plates of plain bacon and eggs, Aaron shook his head and said, "So I guess I'll be staying with Uncle Jeff and Aunt Rio?" Aaron's smile nearly matched Naruto's as he plopped down beside his son and gave him his plate while nudging him with his arm. "Nah, man, I think you're responsible enough to stay here on your own. Just go over for a few dinners and call them. You know how your aunt is, she'll probably have Jeff get the whole police force looking for you. But also keep it on the down low if you bring a girl over." With his scarred cheeks crimson with shame, Naruto turned his head away from his father and said to himself, "Come on, Dad." The blonde teenager forced his shame to subside and went back to the news, grinning subtly. "I was your age once, so I know how it all goes, but just remember to be safe, can't be a grandfather too soon. Even now, he is still shocked by how commonplace real-life superheroes are and how commonplace they are. Just like a famous person. When Naruto noticed the time, he complained and said he had better get ready for school. He groaned and pushed himself from the couch, saying, "It's going to be a long day." Exterior to the apartment, father and son stood outside their flat, both wrapped in winter clothing. "The frigid winds are making me shiver." Naruto gave his dad a tight hug, and Eren gave it back with just as much love and care as his son did. "Okay, I'm off. I'll see you soon. Love you, son." "Love you too, Dad." Naruto waved to his father before he moaned to himself and watched him get into a taxi and drive away. He was reminded that it was frigid outside, and a shiver went up his spine. The blonde with the scars began walking to school. Being aware that it would be just another ordinary day in New York City. The severe gusts hurt his bare face. He groaned in frustration as he fought to make it to work on time, squeezing past the sea of people. The blue-eyed teenager hurried onto the metro, avoiding more people, and barely managed to board his bus. He arrived at Midtown High just in time. Almost on time. It was rather larger than average, but that was to be anticipated, and it looked almost like any other high school. The flood of professors and pupils was filling it up fast. Navigating the packed corridor while avoiding a group of lustful and emotional youngsters. When he noticed a couple making out in front of his locker, he stopped. With a sigh of irritation, Naruto pushed the couple aside and reached in to take his books. He pulled his hand back in time to see the two, engrossed in their own little universe, shoving his locker shut. He quit it since he had greater things to do. He continued into his homeroom, but a small group stopped him. Cool kids who live at Midtown High. Eugene "Flash" Thompson was a stereotypical jock who had the head cheerleader as his flame. Typical bully with a grudge who believed that venting his frustrations on other people was the best way to deal with his own issues. Or, to put it another way, he was like that once. "Yo, Uzumaki," exclaimed Flash, smiling as he embraced the smaller blonde like a brother. "Thank you so much, bro. I got a B- on my test." Naruto punched the jock in the arm while grinning. "I knew you had it." The scarred blonde seemed to consider the statement for a moment before shaking his head. "Hey, are you coming to my party tonight? Parents are gone for the weekend." Before leaving to join his team, Flash gave Naruto a pat on the back and said, "I can't, stuff to do, you know." The blue-eyed teenager waved the jock off, shrugging, "Are you sure? I heard Gwen might be there." "You can shoot your shot, bro. We'll see. I'll catch you later, big man." With his hands back in his coat pockets and his bag slung over his shoulder, Naruto headed to homeroom, pausing momentarily when he saw a friend, Peter Parker. "See you later, Uzumaki." After adjusting his glasses and peering over his shoulder in bewilderment, the nerdy teenager exclaimed, "Hey, Pete." A smile sprang on his face. As he followed the thin teenager, Naruto sighed and said, "Looks like you made it on time." The child was in dire need of a few hamburgers. "Barely." "How's your aunt and uncle?" Peter asked with a warm smile, remembering his lone surviving relative. He said, avoiding fellow high schoolers on their own way to class. "They're both fine." Peter and the wounded youngster resumed their conversation as they walked to one of their joint classrooms, saying, "That's good to hear." It was certain to be a normal day, just like any other. Just the appropriate amount of warm orange sunset changed the appearance of the train yard. A plethora of shapes and shadows were produced by the big, heavy machines that transported people from one location to another. Naruto frequently found himself appreciating the beauty of something so straightforward but serene. The container he had become accustomed to for the last 2 years soon came into sight. It wasn't really noteworthy. One of the plain rectangular metal boxes that littered the train yard, rusting and spray-painted with graffiti. For him, it was a haven where he could be himself and reflect. Naruto slid the doors open, and it was briefly dark before turning on the lights to reveal a dimly lighted room full of dedication. There was a board with newspapers and photographs pinned to files spread out on a table in the center. Naruto sighed in exhaustion at the sight. Still no progress from the last time, he said, yet he continued and delved into the same folders once more. Anyone could see that the young man maintained a professional demeanor despite being deeply engrossed in his work. That is, until he saw a photo of the vehicle accident. All signs of professionalism instantly disappeared, to be replaced by a look of destruction and barely controlled rage. The grip he held on the paper tightened, causing it to wrinkle slightly in his hands. This was always the case. He was known to be level-headed, yet his composure quickly evaporated and his anger surfaced whenever a picture or the subject of what had happened to his parents was brought up. He was powerless to stop it. He calmed himself by taking deep breaths and putting the photo away to ensure he didn't damage any evidence he had on his parents' case. He forced himself to forget about it all. Once more, his fingers scanned the case files for a detail he could have overlooked the first time. He came over here after school on a sort of regular basis to drop off any fresh evidence he found, which would eventually accumulate on top of the other files he already possessed or on top of the massive mound of evidence he had already skimmed through numerous times. This went on for about an hour until he finished looking at everything. His face showed his dismay at finding nothing to assist him. Leaning over his desk, his shoulders drooped slightly in defeat. Not like usual. His hands reached up to massage his weary eyes and attempt to ward off the accumulating headache. I suppose I'll go on to my homework for the time being. The teenager rose from his seat to retrieve his bag, pulling out a file with the name Oscorp printed on it and his assignment, which was due tomorrow. He put the latter aside for the time being and concentrated on his coursework, but occasionally his gaze drifted over to the Oscorp files beside him with interest. When his coursework was finally finished, he immediately checked out what he had been staring at for the previous 5 minutes. With a flare of curiosity in his calculating blue eyes, he mentally read, Oscorp is accepting internships. This was quite recent, as his science teacher delivered the files today. He was certain that Peter would also be interested in this possibility, so he knew he wasn't the only student in his class to acquire it. He had to make a good impression on them when he went there for his interview because he had no idea how many interns they were taking on or who else would be competing. When he heard his phone vibrating in his pocket, his thoughts stopped. The blonde noticed his aunt was calling and pulled it out. He grabbed it up, raising his eyebrows at that. Concerned that his uncle or cousin might have been hurt, Naruto put down his pen and said, "Hey auntie, what's up?" A soft, slightly accented voice called over the phone speaker, "Sabrino, did I call you at a bad time?" The scarred blonde sat back in his seat and sighed as his eyes returned to the Oscorp flyer. No, I just finished up my homework, and I'm free anyway." He was certain that his aunt was grinning when she heard that. "That's good to hear that you're taking your studies very well. You're setting a good example for Miles." The words of his aunt made Naruto smile as well. I was a little embarrassed by the compliments. Miles is a smart kid. He would do the same even if I wasn't around. His aunt, who didn't do this very often, said, "Nevertheless, it's good to hear that you're doing well at school. Can I ask a favor of you? Always putting up a lot of effort as a Brooklyn nurse, wife, and mother." "Anything," said Naruto. His family would always have his time. "I got called up from work for an emergency and will not be home tomorrow, but that would mean Miles will be alone at home, and his father will be busy at work too, so he can't be here. Could you come over tomorrow and look after him, until I get back?" she asked, her anguish conveying through the phone. Since he was her only remaining hope, Rio fervently hoped he would say yes. If not, she would have to take Miles with her or drop him off at the station with his father. Without giving it any thought, Naruto responded to her right away. "Of course, I don't have much going on tomorrow. I'll be there." "Thank you for that, Sabrino. I'll make sure to cook both your and Miles' favorite for tomorrow before I go," she said she would. Ever grateful for her cherished nephew, she rested her shoulders a little in relief. In response to her pleased giggle, the blonde replied, "Well, I'm definitely coming over now." Rio grinned with her nephew, but she shook her head at his joke. "Now, you take care of yourself until then. I have to go and get Miles. As well as get dinner ready for you boys. Love you." He picked up the phone and said, "Love you too, Auntie, I'll see you tomorrow." He noticed that it was already 9 o'clock on his phone, and the lovely orange-pink sky had vanished, to be replaced by a captivating shadow of stars. How come it got so late? After deciding that he had accomplished enough for the day and could complete everything at home, he packed everything back into his luggage and hurried home in order to make it in time. As Naruto emerged from his own container, the air was icy, and he slid the door shut with a bang, revealing his breath. He clipped on a big lock and grunted as he dragged the old lever down. Before heading home, he stuffed his icy hands into his pockets and tugged to make sure it was on correctly. The apartment. When Naruto was working in his container or at home with his father, he never felt more secure. But it didn't feel the same when he entered his own door. He was by himself. With a scowl, Naruto tossed his bag onto the counter and checked the freezer for any leftover food from his aunt's cooking. He was relieved to see a jar of pastels. He put them all in the microwave for a few minutes to ensure he had the ideal balance of hot and tasty because he was feeling more hungry than normal. He carried the warm plate to his room, where he sat on his bed and ate the pastels while fiddling with his phone. His freezing hands were more than glad to hold the plate. He reluctantly clicked on a notice that caught his eye. It was a group shot from Flash's party. It featured Mary Jane Watson, a feisty redhead who drew her two pals near while grinning brightly for the camera. The picture also featured Liz Allen, who blew a kiss to the camera while posing. They were both very beautiful and wonderful girls, but in Naruto's opinion, they were nothing compared to Gwen Stacy. Even though it appeared as though she was forced into the picture against her will, Gwen was still grinning so gorgeously that it made her admirer gasp a little. The wounded blonde was absorbed in his own thoughts, constantly reminding himself of how intelligent and attractive he believed her to be. Shaking his head and letting out a sigh, Naruto shut down his phone. He felt embarrassed and relieved that his father wasn't there to witness him daydreaming about Gwen once more. He decided to only wash his dish in the morning after finishing his pastels. It didn't take long for sleep to take a firm grasp on Naruto when he sighed and slid into his warm bed. The chilly Brooklyn winds blew a gale against his window, causing his eyelids to drift shut. As a young Naruto sat with a bored expression on his face, his gaze wandering over the tiny droplets splashing on sidewalks and streets, the sound of the rain falling was calming. He scooted closer to the window and gently blew his hot breath on the glass. Then, he quickly brushed his fingers in a pattern and drew on the window until his condensation was gone. When he saw his invention, a smile appeared on his face, temporarily filling his ennui, until his father's voice called out to him from the driver's seat. The blond father shook his head in laughter at his kid's perplexed expression as he observed him in his rearview mirror. "Hey, son. What do you think?" "Huh?" Minato laughed at the answer, and his wife laughed at his perplexity. The father asked his son once more, "What would you like to get for dinner, buddy?" His face furrowed as he asked himself what he wanted to have for supper this evening. In a kind and affectionate tone, Kushina asked her son, "Is there anything special you would like, sweetie?" Her smile was a lot like his own. "Maybe a pizza," she proposed, her smile from earlier softening a little. Simultaneously, her son resembled her as he repeated, and his face became recognizable at the suggestion. "Pizza." Kushina gave Minato a melodic chuckle when she said, "Pizza time," and the young blonde in the back gave a loud yell of agreement. When the light in front of them eventually turned green, he was able to put the car in drive and leave their spot, cautiously attempting to merge out of the traditional thick New York traffic, and his son's excitement made him laugh again. As the rain began to pour more heavily, the car turned down a less crowded corner as it gradually left the busier junctions and removed itself from the vast mass of cars. Kushina's head turned to the side as a random flash of red and blue emerged in the corner of her peripheral vision. She saw what appeared to be a person approaching them quickly while being pursued by a group of police cars. Her mouth opened, her eyes grew big, and she could only say, "Minute dash," to alert her husband to what was about to happen. Bang! The figure struck the side of their automobile, driving them off course and causing the car to swerve erratically as Minato frantically attempted to get it back under control, but it was too late for her to adequately warn her husband. With blue eyes anxious at the sight of the approaching police squad, Minato strained to do so as the deafening sirens approached his ear. Minato yanked the wheel with what remained of his control to ensure that his side of the car would sustain the most damage as it proceeded on its path to collide with the police car. The power of the crash caused Naruto's head to spin around, and his mother's terrified scream sent his heart pounding. Naruto groped for his mother and his eyes opened as he called out his name. The roof crunched and glass shattered when the automobile flipped. For poor Naruto, it was all in slow motion. All he could do was gaze in horror as the glass fragments headed straight for his face. He attempted to shield himself by raising his arms, but he was afraid he wouldn't be able to do so quickly enough. Several searing shards found their way through his hurried defense. He waited for excruciating pain while closing his eyes. He saw the same roof every morning when he opened it. After kicking off the covers, Naruto sat on the side of his bed and traced the thin scars on his cheeks carefully while wincing at the perspiration. As he regulated his breathing, his left hand gripped his jeans hard. His chest rose and fell as he removed his hand from his scars. He was thinking about one obvious thing. He scowled as he looked down at his hands and realized that no matter how hard he tried, he was unable to stop the shaking. He looked at his clock and saw that it was only 6 a.m., and he decided that the only way to stop the shaking was to ball them up into fists. There was yet time. I need a shower. Before he could leave to watch Miles at his aunt's house, he had to swiftly put the eerie recollection he had just experienced back into his mind. Not today. Naruto made a self-promise. Today, he refused to let it control him. He refused to allow the events of that day drag him into yet another fit of depression in which he ruminated on his parents. He had to take care of his favorite cousin. He took a fast shower and went to his closet to get some clothing. He and Miles are packing a backpack full of movies, games, and comics. He went to the Morales household after locking the flat. He appeared to be so absorbed in his thoughts that he didn't even realize he had reached his destination until he had finished banging on the door. When he saw Rio's appreciative, lovely, yet exhausted face, he broke out of his profound trance and said, "Oh Sabrino, you made it just in time." After accompanying his aunt into her house and appreciating her embrace and cheek kiss, Naruto smiled as he noticed a tiny afro poking out from behind a couch. He was confirmed by barely suppressed laughter when the tiny child leaped into Naruto's arms, surprising him. The child twirled around, but Naruto caught him with a happy laugh and put him back on the ground. Rio smiled placidly as she took in the sweet view. Her son's good relationship with her adoptive nephew brought her great joy. By this time, the two were practically brothers and very close to one another. "Oh, what's in the bag? What's in the bag?" Miles asked Naruto in an ecstatic yell as his eyes met the packed bag dangling from a single strap on his shoulder. Miles leaned forward to peer inside, gasping as he saw the abundance of his favorite comics and video games nestled next to a PlayStation 4. Naruto echoed the excitement by crouching down and carrying the bag to the front, gently zipping it open. "I brought all of your favorites, so we could play all day." Rio's scathing remarks briefly interrupted their good time. "Remember, don't let Miles stay up too late. He has a set bedtime." Rio nodded in gratitude, but failed to notice the sly smile the scarred teen offered Miles. "Don't worry, Auntie. I'll make sure Miles goes to bed on time." The latter quickly covered his triumphant smile to avoid raising suspicions in his mother's eyes. "Now I've put the food in the fridge, make sure you both eat enough and don't order anything. I've made enough for the entire day." Rio picked up her white nursing shoes and turned back to the two boys for one final time. "You also have both Jeff's and my numbers if anything comes up. Don't hesitate to give us a call." At her remarks, Naruto nodded firmly and smiled reassuringly. "Don't worry. Miles and I got everything under control." As he repeated his comments to his mother, Miles mimicked the smile and posture of his bigger brother. "Yeah, don't worry, Mom, we got everything under control." The adorable scene of the two of them getting along so well made Rio want to shake her head, but she forced herself not to. She got up and moved closer to her boys, kissing Miles' forehead and giving her nephew a deep embrace before leaving the house. As the door closed, Naruto and Miles turned to face each other with the same smile. "You go set up and fire up the PS4, and I'll go get our food." "Hell yeah." He laughed as he watched his cousin dash off to put things up, leaving him to hum one of his favorite songs that he had only lately come across while he walked to the kitchen. "You're the sunflower." With his chin resting on his hand, Naruto watched as numerous popcorn kernels began to pop within the bag while he listened to the microwaves hum. As he waited a few more minutes, he heard Miles playing a game already. Then he pulled out the bag of popcorn and dumped it into a big bowl. Alright, starting out with Uncharted then? I thought you wanted to fight me in Street Fighter. What happened? I beat you too much last time, he asked, settling down on the plush cushion as he joined his cousin on the couch and the Uncharted menu appeared. The boy gave him a loud huff in response to his taunting remarks. That's a lot of talk coming from someone who's almost a decade older than me. You have an advantage. It's not fair. Well, don't go challenging someone and then not backing it up. Besides, are you sure you're gonna do well even in this game? Miles pointed a finger at the boy and narrowed his gaze. Alright, that's it. You and me on Street Fighter again. At the challenge, Naruto arched an eyebrow. Ho, you sure you want to do this? Guess you want to get beat again, huh? He asked, grabbing a spare controller and snagging a seat on the couch. Nah. Before the game had even begun, Miles' thumbs were already ready and his eyes were fixed on the screen. Okay, let's do it, little man. Uncharted 4 promptly gave way to Street Fighter 5. Both of them selected their combatants, and the match started right away. Miles began pressing buttons on his joystick in an attempt to launch a surprise assault, but Naruto easily stopped all of his attempts. Pfft, where did all that bravado go? You can't even hit me. It was unexpected when his character was able to hit a right hook, briefly taking the blonde by surprise. Shut up, just watch me. Ha, how do you like that? Seeing the smug expression, Naruto gave him a sidelong glance and made fun of him for just receiving one blow. His hand extended mid-fight to disrupt Miles' tempo and divert him, breaking his combination while he used his remaining hand to attack. Alright. What if I did this then? He asked. The little child punched Naruto's arm in retaliation, saying, Hey, that's cheating. However, the teen simply shrugged the attack off and won the match. That doesn't count. You cheated. Naruto put on an innocent front and dismissed the charge. A win is a win. After saying so much, Miles puffed again, sulking a little at losing the match. This game sucks. I wanna go back to Uncharted. Naruto shook his head and then reached out to ruffle his cousin's afro, teasing, See, you did it again. You challenged me and failed. The latter, not amused by the taunting, swiftly smacked his hand away. Oh, Miles, when will you learn that you'll never beat me when it comes to games? Whatever. Miles got up from where he was standing and walked to the kitchen on his tiny legs to get himself a drink. This gave Naruto time to return to Uncharted. The two had become stuck playing the video game about 2 hours into their session. Although they weren't entirely successful, they were both leaning forward and thinking deeply as they attempted to determine exactly what they needed to do in this particular moment. Unbeknownst to him, his young cousin was observing him, and shortly after, Miles was imitating him as Naruto cupped his chin in contemplation and squinted his eyes. Before Naruto snapped his fingers and spoke aloud, the two hummed together. Miles. The youngster in question looked up, hopeful that his older relative had worked out his name. He sulked in silence, his hope crushed by the comment, I have no idea what we need to do here. This game sucks. Naruto hummed as he checked the time and saw that it was still early. You say that every time we can't figure something out. Maybe it's time for a break. Miles had an idea and his eyes glowed at the notion. Oh, we could go play some basketball. Naruto smiled while giving his younger cousin a little shove. Another game where you can't beat me. Hey, that was uncalled for. Naruto watched as the afro-haired youngster followed his advice and shot the basketball into the hoop with remarkable ease. Your form is getting better. Just need to bend your knees a little more next time, Naruto said. There you go. You're gonna be better than me in no time with how you're improving. As Miles attempted to take the ball away from the scarred blonde, he was given a slap on the head and remarked, smugly but playfully, "You can count on that. Come on, man." As he encouraged his cousin forward, Naruto noticed the perspiration accumulating on the side of his face and realized it was time for them to take another break. Don't get too cocky now, buddy. You wanna get some ice cream? My treat. Do you even have to ask? Miles Morales couldn't refuse the chance to receive free ice cream in this sweltering climate. Shortly after, they departed, the elder teenager holding his smaller cousin's hand as they made their way from the court into the plaza. When Naruto heard a familiar voice, the two decided to stop their journey to their favorite ice cream shop. Naruto? He and Miles turned to look for the person who had called his name when they heard it. He glanced about for a moment, then froze when he saw Gwen Stacy standing in front of him, smiling uncertainly. Pulling his sleeves, Miles pulled his cousin out of his slight stupor and gazed up at him. Someone you know? After a brief moment of looking down and slowly nodding in agreement, Naruto turned back to face his classmate and crush. Yeah, Miles, this is Gwen. We share a few classes. Gwen. Miles rambled on for a moment before he realized. Wait, isn't that the girl that you have on your MHPG? Naruto grabbed his mouth and quickly silenced him with a tense smile before shoving him in the direction of the ice cream shop a few meters away. Why don't you go find us a nice spot and wait until I get there? The youngster was moved away from the two teenagers, leaving them alone before he could reply. Uncomfortably, Naruto turned back to his crush, his anxious face still visible. He concluded with an overly forced laugh. That's just my cousin, Miles. He's, just a dumb little kid, he said. Gwen grinned wryly. Her lush hair was brushed behind one ear as she remarked, he seems like a cute kid. Cute, yeah, that he is, we're like brothers, Naruto nodded rigidly, as if he was trying to think of something to say, but he was able to swallow the nervous lump in his throat. What am I doing, shit? You fool, you're blowing this. As he attempted to control his heart rate, the blonde was in complete chaos on the inside. While doing it, he silently cursed his hormones. Quickly say something smooth. Gwen arched an eyebrow in amusement at his hesitant demeanor. Are you all right? He answered swiftly and a bit too loudly, taking her by surprise. Fine, he said. I'm fine. Perfectly fine, thank you for asking. He coughed into his fist while turning away and scratching the back of his head. Naruto had to rapidly try to think of something else to say during the seemingly endless quiet. What about you? Like how are you, if you're good or not, I'm saying too much, aren't I? I'm fine, she said, laughing at strange but endearing behavior. Just in a bit of a pinch. Feeling a little tight? That's ideal. Here's where I can help. I just need to be careful not to say or do something foolish. Be her hero, please. The one she's in dire need of, the blonde prepared to ask her what she needed by preparing himself. Miles abruptly emerged and pulled at the blonde teen's sleeve, saying, "Hey, Naruto, I need money." His earlier exhilaration came crashing down in his favor, interrupting all of his momentum. He glared at his cousin, who had no idea what he had done. "Oh, I'm going to punish you for ruining the moment, you little bastard." He dug into his pockets as quickly as he could, pulled out his wallet, and gave Miles the first $20 he saw before turning back to face Gwen, who appeared to find the situation amusing. "Oh, $50. A few seconds later, Miles' words sank into his head. "Hold on a second. $50? Miles had already fled before he could turn around and retrieve the money. He heard Gwen compliment him and flash one of her beautiful smiles, and his gaze flew back to her. "You seem to be very good with kids." On the exterior, he appeared to hold it well, but on the inside, he was more interested in enjoying the attention he received from his crush than he was in the $50. When he pretended to wave off her words, "Oh well, you know. Yes, 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 continue in that manner. Big boy, you're doing fine. So, what's got you in a pinch?" Gwen forced herself not to sigh. "I was staying at a friend's, and my phone battery died, and my dad wanted me to call him this morning. I was wondering if you could lend me yours for a bit so I could call him?" She inquired with a hint of optimism in her tone. A phone appeared directly in front of her face not even a second later. Gwen paused, a little taken aback by how quickly the scarred teenager had pulled out his phone. "Here you go, use it as long as you need to." Uzumaki didn't recall his past until he handed out his phone. "Oh no, I completely forgot about that." Gwen already had his phone in her hand, so it was too late for him to try to save the day. He saw her pause for a moment and give him a playful smile. The blonde, too embarrassed by what was happening to look her in the eyes for the moment, could only turn his head away, blushing. "I like your background. I made a mistake." She caught sight of it. He didn't have to wait long for Gwen's father to answer the phone, and he found himself standing there while she comforted her father. "I'm never gonna live this down." Meanwhile, Miles had returned and offered him the ice cream. Naruto ignored it, perplexing the young guy with the afro hair. Approximately 2 minutes later, Gwen ended her call and handed Naruto back his phone. "Your ice cream is melting, by the way." "Huh?" Naruto saw that his ice cream was indeed melting a little as he stared at the hand holding it. "Damn it, here," he said, looking down to see Miles enjoying his own ice cream and offering him some tissues. "I figure something like this would happen, so I took precautions." Naruto politely accepted the tissues and cleaned his hand before realizing what his cousin had said. "Oh, thanks," he said. His brows widened as he said, "Wait a minute, what do you mean by something like this? Also, where did the rest of the money go?" Miles looked away from him and said naively, "I don't know what you're talking about." When he turned back to face Gwen, he saw that she was observing them with a chuckle. "You two are quite the pair, it almost reminds me of you and Peter in class. I did see you pick up that Oscorp internship flyer. Are you thinking about applying?" Miles simply slept off while savoring his excellent ice treat when Naruto said, "The internship? Oh yeah, I have been thinking about applying. Do you know much about it?" Gwen winked at him and smiled enigmatically. "I may know a little thing or two about it." "By that, what does she mean?" the blonde with scars mused to himself. "Well, I better get going. My dad wants me home, and I don't want to take too much of your and Miles' time. Thank you again, for helping me out." Naruto gave her a nod in return. Oh yeah, I'll see you around. With a light-hearted yet sardonic tone, the stunning blonde girl inquired, you mean outside of school? Yeah, like that. Gwen's smile was one of those that would brighten his day no matter what and make his pulse race. She waved him off, leaving the two of them behind, saying, I'm sure we will. Even as Miles tugged at his sleeves to attract his attention, Naruto watched her leave, his gaze never leaving her shape. He heard his cousin exclaim, hey, and was startled out of his reverie. You done looking? With narrowed eyes, Naruto reached out and gave the boy a forehead flick. Don't think I forgot what you did. Just wait till we get home. What? What did I do? With the exception of the television in the family room, everything in the Morales home was off well into the night. Miles and Naruto both had their eyes fixed on the screen, well, the scarred blondes did. Poor Miles would peek from behind his pillow before pressing his face back into the plush cushion. If it wasn't clear, Naruto suggested that the adopted cousins watch a horror film, and Miles, who wanted to show that he wasn't scared, agreed. Watching a murderer in black robes and a white ghost face mask use a knife to pursue a teenage girl made him regret that decision. The afro-haired youngster looked at his cousin, who was not frightened at all and was putting popcorn in his mouth. With a sigh, Miles raised his head in time to witness the murderer mercilessly stab her in the back with the knife. Miles leaped, and Naruto laughed. Scared? The scarred teenager grinned and shook his head at Miles's remark, "Tch, nah, it's just boring. Also, I think I've seen it before." Ah. Miles poked a finger at him, not appreciating his tone. I know you get scared too. Naruto laughed at his cousin's incredulous expression and added, no way, Miles. Nothing scares me. He then returned his attention to the film. Yes, nothing frightened Naruto Uzumaki. Iho, Sabrino, I'm home, his aunt's voice called out to them from the front door, and Naruto's eyes widened and his heart stopped. Oh, crap. Naruto interrupted the film, placed the bowl on the little table in front of him, and then jumped up and grabbed Miles by the arm, hurrying to get the youngster into bed before Rio could see them both. Holding a palm to his chest to slow his fast-pounding heart, he threw his cousin onto the mattress, gave him a fist bump, and said quietly, "Good night." Then he hurried back and leaped over the couch and sat down. Oh, there you are, Sabrino. Naruto smiled weakly and casually at his aunt. Hey, Auntie. Happy to see you home. How was work? Tiring like always, sweetheart. How was your day with Miles? Rio groaned, stretching her aching limbs with a yawn and a weary groan. Naruto informed her, we had a great time, praising her for the delicious food she left behind and briefly recounting the games he and Miles played and the comics they read. Rio once thanked her adored nephew, knowing that if Jeff wasn't working, he would be doing the same. Thank you again, you helped both myself and Jeff a lot. Naruto got up from the couch and began packing away his belongings, leaving the comic Miles hadn't finished reading behind. Anytime, Auntie Rio. Rio tried to talk her nephew into staying the night, saying, don't tell me you're going home at this time of night. Stay here and go in the morning. Rio was worried that it was too late and risky for him to be out on the streets. I can't, I have an interview for an internship at Oscorp tomorrow. Psi of course. Just get home safely, okay? Naruto gave his aunt a strong hug and a kiss on the cheek before heading for the door and waving, saying, "Adios, tia. I will, you don't have to worry. Adios, sobrino." It was 7 in the morning, and Naruto was alone in his train compartment, listening to music through headphones. He closed his eyes, tapped his foot, and bobbled his head. He began to think about his parents as he looked out the window, unfazed by the underground's darkness, pondering whether they would approve of his actions. I was disappointed that he was still looking and hadn't moved on from their deaths. He frequently questioned if his studies would ultimately be worthwhile. Would he be happy with the outcome? Would the response leave him feeling totally let down? It had been bothering him every day, always lurking in the back of his mind. The blonde shifted in his seat and sighed, turning his gaze from the view to the flyer he was holding. He had picked up the same leaflet about the Oscorp internship in class. I should probably not think about such things before going to something as important as this. Having such unfavorable ideas racing through his already hectic mind before his potential internship with Oscorp would be detrimental to his mental health. He shook off the gloomy thoughts and contented himself with contemplating the impending occasion. Because of his self-confidence and scientific expertise, the scarred blonde felt certain that he had a good chance of being accepted. How will they accept people, I wonder? Would there be a test of some kind, or would there just be a few questions? He was reminded of his encounter with his crush yesterday by the ideas of the internship. He couldn't stop thinking about what she said. He wondered what exactly she knew about it all, because she had been evasive about the whole thing. Although she had not explicitly mentioned her role in the internship, he was certain that she was equally as knowledgeable about science as he and his friend Peter. He felt the train slowing down, indicating that he had reached the scheduled train station, and the loud scream of metal grinding on metal interrupted his thoughts. He brushed himself off, got up, and walked out of the compartment, squeezing between the crowds heading to their train before it left. The crowd of people he had to navigate every time he attempted to board or disembark from a train was the one aspect of traveling by train that he detested the most. Though he wasn't usually jealous of heroes, there were a select handful that he desired he was a member of since they were able to soar through the air. He could already visualize it, the sun on his skin, the wind in his lungs, moving at speeds that the average person could never dream of. His shoulders dropped in sadness as he thought, nah, like that's ever gonna happen. His gaze swept across the insignia carved into the side, just above the company's name itself, as he approached the enormous structure that was Oscorp's. As usual, it appeared unreal to him. It's even a bit too self-centered to show it like that. As they approached the building, one of his best pals appeared, a recognizable face. Peter? When his name was shouted, the brown-haired Parker tilted his head to the side and saw Naruto approaching him, his arm lifted in a wave. "Oh, it's you, Naruto." Naruto's eyebrow went up a little when he said, "Should have expected you to be here too." He turned to his longtime friend, already disliking his cheeky smile, and questioned, "What do you mean by that?" Neither he nor anybody around him should be encouraged by that smile. "Well, it's simply because I know you're a nerd, you know." Peter sneered at what he said. "I know you don't mean it in a bad way, but that doesn't make it any better, Naruto." The boy nearly pouted when he said that. Before responding, Naruto blinked a few times at his answer. "You say that like you haven't gotten me for my scars. Hold on now, that's different. You like Scarface. In your words, Peter, that doesn't make it any better." A second later, the two laughed. The back and forth was immediately abandoned in favor of slamming fists. For the past few years, they had exchanged greetings on a regular basis. Observing his pal straighten his tie, adjust his glasses, and smooth out any creases on the white button-up shirt that his Aunt May had obviously chosen for him, Naruto refrained from laughing at what he saw. "You nervous?" Peter cleared his throat. "A little." "You?" "Can't say I'm not," answered Naruto. He was nervous, but not as much as his friend Peter. There was no denying that he was anxious about what lay ahead. However, it was gradually disappearing because of the self-assurance he acquired from his parents. As the seconds passed, he noticed that Peter was also growing more self-assured, suggesting that it was partly contagious. "I guess we better head inside." "Yeah, we probably should." Naruto bowed and inhaled deeply. "Right," he said. "You go first." Peter looked at the blonde on his right. "What do you mean?" "You said we should head inside. You do the honors." "All right, how about we both head inside at the same time?" Peter searched his friend's face for signs of dishonesty but saw none. "Fine." The two of them began walking toward the door. Naruto contemplated teasing his friend further and lagging behind, but ultimately decided against it as they had already joked enough. As soon as they entered the Oscorp Tower, they were met with a large crowd of individuals strewn everywhere. They were here for the same reason, and the two could see it. The internship. A little later, a woman approached them, holding a tablet, and greeted them with a kind grin. "Hello, can I help you too?" Naruto took the initiative to speak with the two and decided to inform her of their purpose right away. "We're here for the internship. Our names should already be on the list. Uzumaki and Parker." After a few moments of staring down at the tablet in her fingers, the woman's eyes brightened with recognition and she turned back to face them. "Yes, we were expecting both of you. You're both from Midtown High, right?" "Yes." After giving them a nod, she motioned for them to follow. The two gazed to the location where their separate groups had already assembled. "Mr. Uzumaki, you are in Group A over there, and Mr. Parker, you are in Group B right next to Group A." As they headed to their respective assigned groups, the two close friends bid each other farewell for the time being. When Naruto reached his assigned group, the throng was too big and crammed together for him to see anything. Even though he wasn't as effective, he stood on his tiptoes to keep an eye on his other youngsters. Fortunately, the group began to disperse a little more as other areas of the building caught the interest of many people, creating a path for him to follow to the front. His gaze was immediately pulled to the sign, and he read the word that was printed there. Cross-species genetics. He turned to see who had tried to attract his attention after hearing a tap on his shoulder, but he was startled to find who it was. "Gwen," he said, perhaps a little too loudly, as he coughed into his palm and realized a moment later. He asked, Gwen, what are you doing here?" His initial thought was to quickly try to come up with something to say and do in his current circumstance. It seemed as though he was deliberately setting himself up for failure, but why did his blasted brain shut down every time he saw her? At his startled response, Gwen arched one of her exquisite blonde eyebrows before pointing to her lab coat while holding her tablet. "I think you can figure it out by my outfit." After finally understanding what she meant, Naruto's gaze swept over the aforementioned ensemble before returning to her face to find a chuckle. A brilliant smile pushed her beautiful lips together as she said, "Ah, yes, of course. You work here. Obviously. She led the scarred blonde inside the lab, where the other members of the tour group would be waiting, her blue eyes rolling playfully. Naruto nodded slowly, trying to think of something to say to continue the discussion, then blurted out the first thing that sprung to mind. Right, obviously, he said. I didn't expect you to work here, though. Gwen gave him a playful smile as she spoke, refusing to laugh at his nervousness. Well, you never asked me. She is correct. He wasn't an introvert or anything, but for some reason he never really had the guts to approach her and strike up a conversation. I hardly spoke to her at school. He paused to consider what he was about to say, then said, It's cool to see that you'll be leading our group. You are the guide for Group A, right? Gwen laughed and then showed off her iPad, which listed every member of Group A. You'd be right. I am supposed to be showing Group A around. When Naruto heard that, his eyes brightened. Though he was retaining his composure on the surface, the scarred blonde felt like he was on cloud 9 on the inside, knowing that she would be giving him the tour. So, where do we go first? The enthusiasm in his voice made Gwen smile again. She could see the blonde was a little let down when she said, Hold on now. The tour doesn't start until 8:30. We still have half an hour to go. Although, she said quietly, biting her lip in contemplation. She instantly captured his interest, and his enthusiasm and anticipation grew. I could show you around a bit before it starts. Yes. Naruto said right away, eliciting a musical chuckle from his crush that made him clench his fist inside for making her to laugh. Gwen turned around and gestured for her fellow blonde to follow her, and together they headed to one of the genetics lab's highlights. The two stopped in front of a glass cube with a spider moving all over the smooth surface. I'll start off by showing you one of our newest subjects. It's one of a kind. Having already established a solid webbing framework. This little spider here is what I'm talking about. Naruto fixed his intense gaze on it. With the intention of breaking or even cracking its transparent cage, the little creature was moving everywhere. Then an odd thing happened. It halted when it saw them and began to creep in their direction, its 8 legs a blur, before jumping at the glass as if it were attempting to jump at them. Or, more accurately, at someone. He seems excited. The imprisoned spider was fighting the glass all the time, which was nothing new, but the fact that it was only targeting the front part made his crush raise an eyebrow. It really does. This one is usually rowdy, but not this much. It doesn't even bother to mention its prior attempts to assault the sides or back. Knowing that he was safe because the spider was safely trapped inside the glass cube, Naruto leaned forward to examine it up close. Is he the only one like this here? To their surprise, the back of the cube appeared to open up, allowing the spider to leap out and fall to the ground. Gwen was ready to respond to him, but she was unable to do so. Naruto exclaimed, "Oh shit," in shock at how quickly the spider had escaped its trap. His eyes immediately raced around, trying to figure out where it had disappeared to, but to their horror, its color scheme matched the carpet too closely. As she turned to face Naruto, Gwen's eyes widened in fear and she saw the tablet she was holding nearly slip out of her hands. Oh no, did you see where it went? Naruto himself began to panic after witnessing her reaction, suggesting that her terror was contagious. He backed away from the glass and quickly shook his head negatively, looking down to check if it had crawled to their leg. The blonde pair's head snapped to the right to see some other scientists fleeing from what appeared to be the little insect, and they heard a loud cry. His body shifted in response to Gwen's remarks. There it is. Quickly, we have to get it back in one piece. They both hurried to the location where they last saw it, and other scientists even joined them in an attempt to capture the spider before it escaped. Where did it go? Searching for the spider, Naruto's gaze swept around the laboratory. He saw a spider gently moving on a wall as he hurried towards the location, grabbing an empty box nearby as he rotated his body towards something that drew his attention. Gotcha! But before he could catch the spider in the box, it leaped out of his grasp. Son of a bitch, ... The blonde furiously pursued the spider, whirling around and lunging at it as quickly as he could, but his attempts to capture it were unsuccessful, and the eight-legged creature kept crawling away for its life. Fortunately, the scarred blonde was fast enough this time to successfully capture the spider inside the brown cardboard box by dropping the box on top of it. When he exclaimed, "I got it," everyone's attention was drawn to him, and they rushed to help him up and gently take the box away from him to prevent the spider from escaping again. He let out a breath of relief as they removed it from him before he noticed Gwen running over to him. He straightened instinctively. Gwen halted in front of him and exclaimed, "Naruto," as she peered over him with a worried tone. "Are you all right? I heard you managed to trap it in a box. It didn't bite you or anything, right?" As he played it off, Naruto's cheeks began to flush a little at the sight of her concern for him. "I'm fine. It was surprisingly slower than I thought it would be." At first, he was a little taken aback by how quickly the spider had escaped and so much slower while they were pursuing it. In the glass cube, he assumed, it expended all of its energy. When Gwen heard that he was okay, she let out a breath of relief. "Good, I'm happy you're all right." As the Oscorp soldiers approached to seal off the entire room, she turned to face the glass cube and saw many of her fellow interns replacing the spider. She glanced down to view a message after hearing a notification sound from her tablet. Naruto couldn't resist asking, and he watched her with interest as her expression changed from one of relief to disappointment. "Everything okay?" With a disgruntled sigh, Gwen looked up at Naruto, a frown on her lovely face, breaking off her focus from her personal work equipment. "Not good news. I'm afraid the tours have been cancelled today. Someone apparently accidentally caused the spider to get out, and they want to postpone the showcase to another day because of it." With a little smile, Naruto said, "Really? Damn, I was looking forward to you showing me around." As Gwen escorted him out of the genetics lab, he timidly stuffed his hands in his pockets. Gwen gave her fellow blonde a playful glance, her blue eyes gleaming in the most brilliant way as she said, "But if I do this, you better not get me in any trouble. Okay? Well, I can see if I could get you a day pass, and then I could give you that tour around the lab site hopefully without anything else breaking loose." Naruto decided not to worry about it at the moment, saying, "I promise, I won't be any trouble." He felt as like his heart was doing cartwheels, butterflies were fluttering in his chest, and he had a strange tingling sensation as if something were creeping up his arm. Gwen remarked, "Somehow, I doubt that," as they drew to a halt outside the lab. Group B quickly returned and merged with Group A. While Peter and the other potential interns were being escorted outside, Peter was seen searching for his disfigured friend. "I have your number, so I'll text you on a good day to come around." Naruto inquired, "You have my number?" in the hopes that she might have asked Mary Jane or one of their mutual acquaintances directly. Gwen's reply, "You applied for the internship. How else would I have your number?" dashed that hope in an instant, leaving him with a halting reply. "Oh." Gwen responded with an apologetic look as Naruto noticed some of his less than subtle crush's fellow interns calling her over. Gwen waved briefly before turning and racing back to the lab, her tablet exploding with messages, saying, "I have to go. It was nice seeing you, Naruto." Naruto turned and headed for Peter, pausing only to ask himself, did she just ask me out on a date? "See ya, Gwen." As he left Oscorp with a newfound swagger, a beaming smile filled his face. His grandfather would be quite proud. Once again, Naruto found his earbuds playing music as he returned home after saying farewell to Peter at the metro before boarding the train to Harlem. The blonde turned off the outside world and nodded his head in time with the music he was enjoying, his mind circling the events of the postponed tour. "It's you and me, and if only I could." He passed a lot of individuals who appeared to be faceless blurs rather than real people, and the automobiles that passed by appeared to be flashes of color blending together as his mind was too preoccupied with what was about to happen to notice his surroundings. "I'd make a deal with God and get him to swap our places." He made the correct turns as though his body were operating automatically, avoiding any cars that would have struck him due to his failure to look before crossing roads and any people who might have bumped into him in his current condition. His smile, which had been there ever since he left Oscorp Tower, had only gotten bigger as the music surrounding his gloomy thoughts. Be running up that road. Be running up that hill. Be running up that building. It's unbelievable that it went so well. As well as it could have, barring the trip being cancelled and the spider escaping before he was able to catch it again. Who would have thought that a spider escaping would result in me getting a date with Gwen? The ridiculousness of it all made him laugh. He said aloud, "Perhaps spiders aren't so horrible after all." He never imagined that he would truly come to accept spiders, but here he was, thankful to a spider for delivering what he had long desired. So if only I could be running up that hill. With no problems, as Naruto approached his door, the song gradually faded away, but he abruptly stopped as he experienced a severe pain on the back of his neck. Wincing as he pulled his hand away to look at the smeared mess that was the spider that had bitten him, he hissed between his teeth as his hand struck his neck with a loud slap. He scowled at the massive tangle of cobwebs over his entryway as he craned his neck back. He was going to have to get rid of that. So much for spiders not being so bad. He felt as though a wave of nausea had suddenly and unexpectedly hit him, drowning him in this fresh, unexpected illness. Sweat soaked his clothes as he clung languidly to the wall, barely making it to the flat. His sloppy movements were so awful that even tiny drops would fall off his face. As he staggered in the doorway, coughing, Naruto used his common sense to close the big piece of wood, pressing all of his weight against the study frame as his trembling hands fumbled with the lock. When the scarred blonde realized how pale he truly was in the mirror, he grimaced and took off his jacket and the most of his damp clothing. His body felt like it was on fire, yet now it was freezing, and goosebumps ran up his body as he began to shake. Weak-footed, he found his room and collapsed onto his bed, encircling his trembling body with his heavy sheets and curling into a ball. When he finally dropped out, his blue eyes were bewildered and rolled into the back of his head, but his body was still shaking and convulsing even though he was unconscious. Naruto moaned in agony while he slept, tearing at his sheets as his body twisted and turned and panting as if he were trying to resist the physical transformation. He was losing. His entire body was altering, including his cells, DNA, and genetic cells, which were changing and combining with the spider's poison. In his dazed and sleepy state, Naruto seemed to be able to dream only of the same car crash that claimed his parents and a horrifying mixture of huge spiders. He kept seeing that, his mind making him repeat the incident for whatever punishment he believed he deserved. Naruto threw his covers off himself, rising and falling quickly in an erratic cadence as he said, "No." The scarred teenager swung his arm, eyes still closed, and in a strange but remarkable move, it adhered to the wall. The wall's coolness seemed comforting. Unconsciously, his body shifted, his hand and back adhering to the wall like the spider that had bitten him. In an attempt to escape his dreams, he began to crawl. "Mom." In the corner of his roof, he discovered a dead end. His bones developed, shattering and then instantaneously healing and becoming stronger, causing him to whimper in pain. The muscles grew larger and more resilient. Even after the excruciating procedure, Naruto continued to have a high fever and refused to wake up. Our favorite damaged blonde was left with no choice but to endure. As night terrors seized him, he began to shake and his head swung to the left and then the right. His body shifted from the place where he had temporarily taken solace. His movement was smooth and effortless, as though he were born to move this way, as if he had always supposed to move this way, despite the fact that his entire body hurt from his change to his very genes. After making his way across the room, the damaged blonde crawled out to the living room. His body shivered to a halt in the center of the room, and his pained whimpers changed from ragged trousers to calm breathing as the pain gradually subsided into a dull ache. His expression had changed from one of misery to one of peace for the first time since he had returned home. The transformation from a normal human to a hybrid spider-man was complete, but the scarred blonde was unaware of it. Naruto opened his eyes blearily as the sun's brightness struck his face through the window of his and his father's apartment. He frowned and covered his eyes with an arm to shield them from the dreadful light, then closed his blue eyes a second later. As he rolled to the side and moaned, he seemed to reach for a blanket, but his hand encountered nothing but empty air rather than the warm, cozy blanket he so much wanted. The chill in the air sent a shiver up his spine, hitting his exposed flesh. "Ugh!" Naruto groaned wearily as he got to his feet, figuring he had slipped off his bed and only needed to rejoin it. As soon as he saw the TV in his living room, he stopped. TV? He couldn't figure out why, but it didn't look like the one from his room and it looked strange. The cold hit him again, and he shivered as he glanced down at himself, wondering why he was wearing only his underwear. When he turned to face the floor, he was startled by the chilly feel of the wooden floor and discovered that his room had no gray rug and only bare wood. Hell, his room appeared to be empty but for the television. His eyes squinted as he glanced back at the TV for a moment. He then studied the well-known device twice more before he finally moved his gaze throughout the room and realized he was in the living room rather than his room. He was hanging upside down on the ceiling, which was the immediate shock and waking he needed, in addition to the fact that he was not in his room. His horror caused him to lose his hold on the ceiling, and gravity took over, bringing him crashing to the earth with a startled scream. He felt his instincts take control for a moment, flipping in midair so his arms and legs supported his fall as he fell gracefully on the ground like a spider. A sudden sense of danger went through him, sending a shudder down his spine. He froze to observe for a moment before slowly getting to his feet and saying, "Whoa." Naruto was unsure of what had seized him at that moment, but it seemed completely normal to him. He looked at his hands in mild amazement. He raised his hand to the back of his neck and rubbed it against the area where the spider had bitten him, sensing the bump there, which was strangely smaller than it had been the night before. And when his palm touched the spider bite, he experienced almost no discomfort. Did it recover that fast? He exhaled loudly, then dropped his hand back to his side before raising it again to grasp his head as a sharp pain jolted through it, forcing him to close his eyes for a moment. His senses were abruptly overpowered, and he began to breathe more deeply, letting out painful breaths. After just 30 seconds, the agony gradually decreased and he was able to control his breathing. What the hell is happening? He clenched his teeth and felt the impulse to jump up, but he forced himself to hold back with some difficulty as his body jolted in place and a frightening sense of danger ran through him again. He could hear his alarm clock more clearly. After taking another glance at his apartment's living room, the scarred blonde walked slowly back to his room, where he found the door unlocked. The scene that met his eyes was entirely different from what he saw when he went to sleep the night before. Even though his room wasn't always neat, he always took care to keep it from being very disorganized. His clothes were strewn over the floor, many of the goods from his shelves were damaged, and his blankets were far from his bed at the moment. It appeared as like someone had broken in and completely destroyed his room, which was a far cry from how it usually looked. A tiny scowl crept onto his face as he picked up some of the shattered fragments of one of his figures. After placing the pieces on his bedside table, he stepped back and gathered up the scattered clothing, throwing it in the hamper in the corner of his room before going to his closet to select new clothing. What the hell happened here? Did I do this? He asked himself. As he pulled on the doorknob, the closet door unexpectedly sprang open pretty fiercely, breaking off from the closet and sending him tumbling on the ground, stunned that a simple pull could break it. The closet door dropped out of his grasp and hit the floor close to his feet with a very loud thud. Oh no, what the hell? With a startled look on his face, he got up from the floor and decided to merely mend the door and tidy his room later. He grabbed the door that he had pulled from the closet and with a quick motion attempted to replace it, complaining to himself as he went. After failing to put the door back in its proper place, the blonde swore to herself, "Come on, man. Why is this happening?" before giving up and putting it on the floor while selecting a few haphazard outfits. He walked into the bathroom, his face still in the bewildered state it had been in since he woke up, and he looked at himself in the mirror, seeing right away how sweaty he appeared. Am I ill? It was definitely not as though he was ill. There seemed to be something more distinct about this. He had another jolt of agony in his brain, but it wasn't as awful as the last time, so he had to close his eyes to cope. Naruto inhaled deeply to calm himself, and when he opened his eyes again, he noticed that his perspiration had gotten worse. What is happening to me? He reached for the sink to wash his face and wipe away the perspiration, but before his hand could fully touch the handle, he stopped, recalling what had happened with the closet. His fingers curled lightly over the handle as his hand advanced slowly, the memory still fresh in his mind. He took a deep breath and proceeded to move the handle, twisting it painfully slowly as drops of water began to fall before it rushed down completely. Naruto used the cool water to splash his face, making careful to cover every part of his body to remove the perspiration. A lazy, contented smile spread across his face as he looked back at the mirror. He appeared to be normal again, but then he shivered and braced himself against the sink, breaking the porcelain with his might. With every second that went by, the fissures widened and quickly spread throughout the sink until it shattered. As Naruto struck the floor, a loud cracking sound reverberated throughout the restroom. During that moment, he failed to hear the sound of glass breaking as it gradually descended toward him. His senses became frantic. He had to kick himself out of his current position to avoid the glass fragments that would have fallen on him, as though something were alerting him to impending danger. The blonde, shocked by what had happened, straightened up and stepped away from the damaged sink to check if he had broken anything else with his strange new strength. He stared back at the partly shattered mirror, a cracked face of himself peering back, his heart pounding a little as he carefully tried to process what had just happened. He became nervous as he stared at the shattered image. His back struck the bathroom door and pushed it open as he slowly started to back out of it, but he stopped when he struck a cupboard. The same senses came back, although they felt a little different this time. His sense of danger had vanished, but warning signals continued to ring in his mind, causing him to spin around and grasp the image with one hand while extending the other slightly. Another strange feeling jolted up through him, this time solely around his wrist, before he could even completely enjoy catching the enormous family portrait. His ears were filled with the sound of something launching itself and clinging to something. He turned his head slightly and noticed a thick thread of something that looked like webs running from his wrist to his father's bedroom door. His eyes were huge, and he frantically shook his wrists to remove whatever was clinging to it. What on earth is this? That can't possibly be coming from me. He shook his wrist a lot, but the sticky stuff remained in place. With a growl of frustration, he tore his arm back with a strength he had never used before, yanking the door away from its hinges and in his direction. Naruto was forced to brace himself by crossing his arms and closing his eyes as he saw the approaching item moving quickly. A light "oomph" escaped him when the door slammed into him, drowning out the sound of the door cracking as it struck his body. After a few seconds, the blonde with scars cautiously opened his eyes and lowered his arms to reveal a startling scene. Shock flooded his blue eyes as he gazed at the now cracked door in front of him, the substance still clinging to it but no longer fastened to his wrist. "Fuck, my dad is going to kill me," I said to myself, cursing what had transpired. The corridor appeared to be in disarray. Fragments of the shattered door were scattered across the floor, stretching from his current position to his father's bedroom. I need to tidy up all of this right now. As he picked up all the pieces on his way to his father's bedroom, Naruto's panicked movements were immediately apparent. The terrified teenager hesitated and stopped himself before he could enter the room completely. Since it wasn't necessary, he rarely went into his father's room. He would be entering for the first time in years. He gulped and stepped inside, shivering as he began to pick up the bits from the floor, doing his best to disregard the identical warning from before. Frowning at the sensation, he made an attempt to ignore it repeatedly as he worked to finish everything as soon as possible before his body moved uncontrollably to the side and he was confronted by a laptop he had never used before. The feeling ceased, vanishing completely as though it had never existed. However, because of his adopted father's computer, it was at the back of his mind. It was something he had never seen. Even though he couldn't recall ever seeing his father on it, it looked that he had left his electronic gadget open and that, based on the appearance of it, he had received recent messages. Our devastated teen was overcome by curiosity. Scarred brow raised, he stepped forward gently, certain he could see the Oscorp in the corner of a notification before the screen went black. That was apparently enough to get him to enter the dimly lit room, grabbing the laptop and flinching as the light from his father's computer blinded his eyes. His finger hovered over the Oscorp message as he brought the arrow to it. Why would Oscorp send Dad emails? Before clicking on the actual mail, he pondered. Rather than the email's content welcoming him, a new pop-up window requesting a password to access the message instead emerged. With a frustrated click of his tongue, Naruto dismissed it and proceeded to the next one, only to get the identical pop-up once more. He let out a disappointed sigh and turned his focus to the folders, narrowing his gaze a little when he saw them. Their names were just Folder 1, Folder 2, and so forth. He stepped back from the laptop with what appeared to be a disappointed sigh, realizing that he had been violating his father's privacy. What am I doing? In his mind, our favorite blonde apologized to his father once again while berating himself inside and promising to replace the door to his room before returning home. Before leaving the bedroom, he tried to forget what he had just seen by giving the laptop one final glance and hastily restoring its appearance to make it appear as though he hadn't touched it. He didn't want his father to suspect him of anything. He set the pieces down beside the ruined door and looked at it for a while, trying to figure out how he was going to mend everything. After giving it some thought, he shrugged and said, I'll just get someone to come in and install a new one." He started to head back to his bedroom, but was halted in his tracks by a loud growl from his stomach. The growls resumed a second later, this time more loudly. The abrupt sensation of hunger was more than he had ever experienced. A minute later, he was standing in front of his refrigerator downstairs. "Oh man, I don't think I've ever wanted to eat so badly as right now." He did not really pay any attention to what he picked up, but gorged himself on whatever he could get his hands on, his mouth watering slightly at the notion of what was inside. He let out a loud burp after eating what appeared to be his seventh sandwich, and was left to gaze at the Chinese takeaway he had ordered halfway through his breakfast, some frozen food, chicken, and leftovers from his aunt's cooking. Only now did he realize the true amount of food he had eaten. He enjoyed eating a lot, but never this much. He didn't have much time to think about it because he realized it was becoming late when he received a notification on his phone. "Shit, I gotta hurry." His head still racing from what had happened to him this morning, he opened the door to his locker and shuffled through his books as fast as he could, ignoring everyone else. When he heard the loud bang, he winced and closed the locker, swearing to himself how loud it sounded. Even though he had taken care to apply as little force as possible, he still thought it sounded really loud. He inhaled deeply and turned around, ignoring everyone as he walked to his class. He made a concerted effort to block out the sound surrounding him and concentrate on what had transpired this morning. In addition to the fact that he could adhere to walls, it was strange how he suddenly became so strong. How could I have done any of that at all? Oof. He had just bumped into a senior, who fell to the ground after colliding with him, but he was too preoccupied with his thoughts to see it. "Hey, watch where you're going," said the senior, frowning. The Uzumaki, too preoccupied with his own thoughts and having already forgotten the senior, ignored him entirely as he continued to walk to his classroom. The elder frowned as he turned to leave. "Asshole." He spit out and turned to leave. Trying to take a break from all the sound streaming in, he sat down on one of the seats in the corridor and took deep breaths. Everything seemed so much more delicate now. He could not handle the sounds or the smells. Everything was so much more heightened that it was a miracle he was still able to function the way he did. Naruto grunted and did his best to block out the myriad sounds he could hear. Everything around him, including the teacher's chat with a student, the chirping of birds, and even his own breathing and heartbeat. "I wonder what's up with him. I don't know, but it looks like he's having a panic attack. Should we call the school nurse?" Everything was too noisy. He bowed his head, put his hands over his ears, and clamped his eyes shut, wanting everything to stop. He muttered to himself, attempting to block out all the noise, "I'm losing my mind." He got up with some difficulty and walked to the class, doing his best to ignore it all. From the moment the door drew nearer, everything seemed to improve slightly. It got a little easier to ignore the voices and everything else. He felt a little relieved that he could now breathe more easily, and his heart began to slow down a little. Before the warning reappeared with a force, and similar to this morning, it seemed to be alerting him to something impending. It disappeared as quickly as it did, and he found himself standing in front of none other than Gwen Stacy, who gave him a questioning look. With concern in her blue eyes, she said, "Naruto, are you okay? You look pale." For a moment, the scarred blonde gazed at her. Before he realized that Gwen was waiting for him to respond, whatever had been warning him a moment before had vanished as if it had never existed. He answered slowly, "Yeah," and then, with a little more assurance, "I'm fine. Don't worry." "Okay. If you say so," Gwen cracked a grin. "I saw you spacing out when you were walking. You looked really uncomfortable. Are you sure everything's okay?" Not wanting to alarm the blonde in front of him, he nodded his head and added a little more force to his voice. "Yes, Gwen, I'm fine. I just wasn't feeling well this morning. That's all." He smiled at her and turned back, hoping that the conversation would finish there. "Listen, I have to get to class. I'll talk to you later, okay?" he said. Gwen said softly, "Okay." As she watched Naruto give her a feeble smile before turning and leaving. Her lips dipped into a worried frown. That was strange, she thought to herself, a little alarmed. He didn't turn around. Rather, he decided to leave and go into the classroom. He would have delighted to chat to the blonde at any other time, but his mind was too confused. With his luggage dangling from his seat by a single strap and appearing to be about to come off at any second, Naruto sagged in his chair. The sunbeams shining through the classroom windows nearly blinded Naruto, and for a minute his head throbbed in pain, causing him to wince. The scarred blonde quickly shaded his eyes with his palm, blinking in pain before he grew accustomed to the intense light. Zzzzzzzzzzzzzzz. Naruto's head turned to the left, his pupils widening as his gaze focused on a harmless fly that was buzzing in the room's corner. With a groan, Naruto wiped his sweaty brow and tugged at his shirt collar, feeling heated all over again. What should have been a whisper that Naruto couldn't hear was as obvious as day. Why is he acting so weird today? The person sitting far away, leaning down to speak in her friend's ear, caught Naruto's attention as he whipped his head back and gazed. As soon as his eyes met his, the students turned aside. It wasn't just them, though. Everybody in the class seemed to be shouting at the top of their voices, and he could hear their words echoing in his mind. When his ears began to ache, he instinctively put his hands to them out of concern that his eardrums would burst. As the homeroom instructor entered the classroom, Naruto abruptly got up, grabbed his bag from his chair, and rushed to the door. Roger Harrington, the science and homeroom teacher, staggered back a little when the blonde almost ran into him and knocked his spectacles off his face. "Good morning, Clawo," he exclaimed. Unable to comprehend what was happening with his student, the teacher's mind reeled as he saw the blonde rush down the hallway. Naruto was forced to go. He had to get out. Everything seemed to become worse somehow. He was so engrossed in the sound and the illumination that he failed to notice the two 6'4" football players approaching him, absorbed in their own chatter. Although it was inevitable that they would collide, the consequences were surprising. Without even realizing what he has done, Naruto crushes the two jocks to the ground instead of being knocked off his feet. Those who witnessed his actions gave way to the hurried, scarred blonde. After making a hasty getaway from everything, Naruto found himself on the streets of New York. It was all too much, the invading sound of the cars and the bustling people. Naruto found a place to isolate himself quickly. A passageway. The roaring noise lessened as he moved more into the isolated lane until it was tolerable. Naruto closed his eyes and put his back against a brick wall, thinking, "Calm down. Think of things that make you calm," he said, taking a long breath and then slowly exhaling while supporting himself with a palm to his head. What calmed him? Naruto began to calm down at the notion of his not-so-secret crush on his parents, his school buddies, his best friend Peter, and Gwen. The world no longer seemed as deafening as it had, and the sun no longer blinded him when he cautiously opened his eyes. He felt somewhat normal. Naruto frowned as he glanced down at his hands, a single thought racing through his sharp mind. He had to return to the laboratory. His cool sweats had begun to subside by the time he reached the train yard, and he began to feel normal, or as normal as one could be under the circumstances. This place was the perfect place for him at the moment because it was hidden, quiet, and private. No more blaring lights to overpower his sensitive senses, no more noise, no more people swarming around him. It was flawless. This location was ideal for him to test these new skills he seems to have acquired. Compared to previously, his body felt both lighter and stronger. His vision, which had not been poor before, was perfect now. Even his debilitating sense of hearing and smell began to feel much more sophisticated. Strangely, it seemed as though this was the way things were meant to be. As though he had undergone some type of metamorphosis and was now entire. All right, let's see what all this is about. Blue eyes wandered around the rusty train compartments and containers that made up the abandoned rail yard. First things first. Strength test. Naruto didn't want to move an abandoned train compartment and pull his back. As of yet, he was uncertain about his strength to raise one of those. He decided for something easier to handle and discovered what looked to be an abandoned car with all of its windows broken and the metal rust orange. As he got closer to the car's hood, the scarred blonde shook his arms loose and rolled his shoulders. As he knelt down, he began to feel misgivings, but he brushed them off as soon as he had a firm hold on the metal. Naruto closed his eyes, counted to 3, and got ready to hoist what would likely be the largest object of his life. However, when the car in his arms appeared to be little more than a bowling ball, his eyes widened in surprise. He was left perplexed, no, shocked, by his own might. He went above and beyond, then merely hefted the car off the ground by pressing his heels into the concrete and raising it all the way to the point where it was above his head. He laughed loudly and enthusiastically at how effortless it was for him to accomplish such a remarkable feat. Gazing down at his hands in amazement, he gently put the ancient vehicle back on the ground. He asked himself, apparently still in disbelief at what he had just accomplished, did I really just do that? A tiny tickle went up his arm as he repeatedly clenched his fists, giving him a thrilling sensation but also a slight itching sensation on his wrist. I wonder. He pointed to his next target, ignoring the latter. It was far larger than his last one, both in terms of weight and size. It was a shipping container, dark crimson, its color fading from years of exposure to the sun. He felt a little nervous and exhilarated as he stepped up to the next challenge. Compared to the automobile he had just lifted, this was a lot heavier. However, that didn't stop him from trying out his plan. After taking a few deep breaths to regain his composure and get ready, he knelt, put his hands beneath the heavy metal, and grunted as he raised the container, albeit a bit harder than he had to do with the automobile. A sensation of uneasiness settled in his gut, and he felt the tremendous weight settle in his palms, causing his breath to catch in his throat. Unlike the other containers, he had forgotten that this one was full. The blonde nevertheless managed to lift the hefty load off the ground in spite of this. A smile slowly spread across his face. In the best sense of the word, this was exciting. As he began to lift the container off the ground, metal moaned under Naruto's crushing hold, bending and denting the hard material, leaving the scarred blonde's fingers imprinted in the thick steel. As his trembling arms extended, Naruto began to raise the hefty metal object above his head completely, the container gradually rising higher and higher. He had a crazy smile on his face, adrenaline coursing through his veins, and his heart thumping. He was doing it so effortlessly. It was similar to learning to walk. Even though he was performing something amazing for the first time, he seemed to be an expert and a master of his body. He threw the container to the side, his adrenaline and the joy of what he had just done still high, and the ground shook and trembled fiercely, the concrete breaking beneath the metal giant and leaving a small crater. He was reminded that his hearing was much more sensitive now, and he crinkled from the sound the impact produced. It was much stronger and caused him to wince, yet it was no longer intolerable. Additionally, he didn't have to make incredibly loud noises to draw unwelcome attention. The blue-eyed teenager retreated a few paces, his gaze observing the devastation he had wrought with a mixture of pride and satisfaction and astonishment. Super strength. Holy cow, I'm really strong. He was certain that this was not a dream. Usually, his dreams stopped before they reached a section this fantastic. The difficult problem now arose. What else was different, he couldn't say for sure. There was no denying that he had changed in other ways, and he was both delighted and concerned about the possibility of gaining other abilities. In particular, the webbing that emerged from his wrists this morning. I wonder if... He muttered as he examined it closely and rubbed his wrists. There was truly nothing unusual that he could notice. His wrist appeared the same as always, if perhaps a little more red and inflamed. He clenched his fist with concentration. Please work, please. He attempted to visualize the appearance of the web by imagining it emerging from his wrist. He waited for a few seconds while he put his arm out in front of him, aiming toward another container a few feet away. Damn it, he mumbled to himself, eyebrows slightly furrowed. The high school student was determined to make it work and didn't give up. He swiftly and repeatedly flicked his wrist, saying, "Maybe I need to put more energy into it." However, nothing occurred once more. He attempted to flick his wrist, make a few movements, or do whatever else he could think of, but it was ineffective. Naruto sighed deeply in frustration, his hand falling back to his side as his shoulders drooped a little. He massaged the back of his head, unsure of what to do next. Okay, so maybe I need some sort of push or something. The other stuff wasn't like this. That simply required willpower, but this was something else entirely. The web seemed to appear out of nowhere this morning, and he had no idea what had caused it to do so. Perhaps he was in danger or something, and that set off the trigger. He massaged his chin and tapped his foot on the floor. He pondered aloud, I'll have to simulate danger somehow for it to be forced to come out. Before Naruto's roving blue eyes discovered the base of a massive crane with its metal mast towering far in the sky, he glanced at his hands. A grin began to form on Naruto's lips as he said, I have a terrible idea. In a matter of seconds, Naruto was using his newly acquired athleticism to climb the metal structure. He didn't have to worry about losing his hold because his new, incredible abilities held him in place. It was euphoric. It was difficult for him to honestly describe the intensity of his excitement. Naruto was almost out of breath from the breathtaking view of New York City when he reached the summit of the tall peak. The wind brushed over his skin, the sunlight warmed his cheeks, and a cool breeze tousled his hair. It was quite soothing. He stood there for a time, taking it all in, forgetting his problems and relishing the quiet. However, the blonde began to reconsider this notion after glancing down and recognizing how high up he was. His legs felt like jelly, but the height wasn't an issue. He was not afraid of heights, but one did not need to be afraid to see the risk of being there. He inhaled deeply to calm his nerves and steady his tumultuous heartbeat. He moved slowly toward the edge, coming to a halt only inches from the precipitous cliff. All right, here goes nothing. His legs left the safety of the platform as he took a leap of faith, and a moment later he was falling rapidly to the ground. Gravity pulled him down into the harsh ground as air rushed past him. Web. He couldn't stop thinking about it. His body twisted in mid-fall as he frantically wished for the web to emerge from his wrists. An amazing line of webbing blasted out of Naruto's wrist in a powerful twip, and he instinctively threw his right arm forward, bending his wrist and curling his two fingers into his palm. The scarred blonde hovered in midair, hanging by the thread of webbing, as the webbing made contact with the crane's jib and his body jerked to a quick stop. Holy shit, said Naruto as he exhaled, ecstatic at the thrilling and remarkable accomplishment. The blonde waited a moment to process what had happened, then pulled at the web's line. Seeing that it remained stable. It actually worked, the teenager exclaimed with excitement. He hovered in the air with his fingers wrapped around the web as the high of success from the awful idea functioning gradually subsided. Naruto hummed to himself, as he pulled away the one string of the webbing that had prevented him from falling to the hard earth. Oh, come on, man. His enthusiasm soon subsided when he realized he was already affixed to the crane. He sighed in irritation, and his brow quirked. In order to gain velocity and break the web apart, Naruto began swinging his body back and forth before falling the last distance. He rotated his body in the wrong direction and ended up hanging helplessly by his wrist, so his strategy was a failure. He couldn't resist letting out a disappointed sigh. This is bullshit. The new-powered kid groaned in frustration as he pulled at his wrist once more without any success. How can I remove this? His new abilities have acted out too frequently thus far, leaving him unable to control them. How did I keep it under control the last time? Before recalling how he had handled the matter the prior time, he asked himself. The blonde closed his eyes and recalled a pleasant recollection that usually helped him relax. Through a little window, sorrowful blue eyes observed a community gathering where families and friends gathered to embrace the holidays and celebrate Christmas together. It was a time to get together and rejoice with the people we care about, and to share happiness and kindness among all people. Naruto Uzumaki, however, was not among the fortunate. The blonde child used to look forward to Christmas. Out of all the holidays throughout the year, he used to love this one the most. However, things were different this year. The happiness was gone. There was none of the festive excitement that normally accompanied the occasion. He was always reminded of what he no longer had, and only a dull pain festered inside him. When his door creaked open and Aaron Davis, his new guardian, stepped inside, shutting the door behind him and placing a tiny box down, his eyes were diverted from the crowd. "You doing all right, kid?" Naruto simply responded with a shrug. He was not at all right. Only a few months had passed since the deaths of his father and mother, and the thought still hurt. He really missed them. The child muttered under his breath, trying not to express his sadness. "Yeah, sure." Aaron rubbed the back of his head and moaned. "This is going to be difficult." He sat down next to Naruto and put a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I know this is a hard time for you, but you can't let it get to you." "They wouldn't want that." Naruto found resonance in the words. The ache persisted even though he knew his parents wouldn't approve of that. He couldn't just brush it off like that, it still felt new, like it had happened the day before. "Yeah, I know." Both men were silent, and silence fell. It was a challenging circumstance. He had been taken in by Aaron out of guilt and sympathy. The man wasn't exactly the most adept at handling such issues. But it didn't mean he didn't make an effort. "Hey, I got you a gift. Might cheer you up a bit." Naruto's eyes brightened somewhat at the suggestion of a gift, and he turned to face the elder guy, who approached and brought the box he had placed in front of him. "I know things are rough, and I don't expect you to be happy and get over everything instantly, but I just wanted you to have a good Christmas, even if it's just a little." Naruto approached the box slowly. Even though the wrapping was straightforward, it still had meaning for you, boy. He glanced up at Aaron, who gave him the all-clear with a simple nod. Slowly and carefully, the scarred blonde began to take off the wrapper. Opening his presents had always been enjoyable to him. It was thrilling to be a part of the mystery, the excitement, and to wonder what was inside. A big, teary smile began to spread across his face as he ripped through the wrapper. He never imagined Aaron would make the extra effort to bring him a gift like this for Christmas. There were photos of him and his family in the box. His bigger hand dug inside the box and produced a Nintendo DS. "I hoped these would cheer you up a bit. It can't bring back your family, but I can help you preserve their memories. I bought this as well to help cheer you up. I know I ain't your family or anything, but you're still my responsibility. I want to make sure you're all right, and I just want you to know that I'm here for you, kid. Thank you," was mumbled by Naruto as he sniffed, wiped away the tears that had begun to fall down his cheeks, and put his small arms around the elder man in a tight embrace. Although Aaron's hand came out and patted Naruto's head a second later, he tightened up a little. "I'm here for you, kid." Aaron comforted the younger man during their brief period of silence. The blonde gradually began to relax as the seconds passed, and the tears eventually stopped. Even though it was a small smile, his blue eyes lowered themselves to the presents before him. "So, can I start playing with this already?" he asked, glancing at the DS. The elder man ruffled his hair and laughed. They could hear people still gathered outside as he gazed out the window. "Sure, kid, but," he said. Aaron gazed back down at the child, whose large blue eyes widened in astonishment. "Why don't we go outside for a bit?" go around the city and maybe have a snowball fight or two. You and me. You can play the game when we come back. What do you say? Let's do it. Naruto said, his earlier sadness nearly forgotten, a toothy grin spreading across his face as he leaped from his seat. The remembrance brought a soft smile to the scarred blonde's face. It was a wonderful day. Although the day had begun somewhat poorly, he had enjoyed playing outside with Eren and enjoying Christmas with him as the evening came to a close. His heart was still, his breathing even, and he no longer felt the irritation he had. A sense of calmness swept over him. In the midst of this mental state, his body responded, causing the webbing to break free from the crane. Before he even realized what was happening, he was plummeting through the air once more. Naruto grumbled as he hit the ground, not anticipating that the web would break so abruptly and land on his butt. The blonde complained and rubbed his lower back. Okay, not the most graceful landing. He was surprisingly pain-free. He had anticipated experiencing severe back pain. However, he felt terrific, better than fine. There was no stiffness, and his body did not seem bruised in any manner. His body seemed much harder and more resilient, though he wasn't sure how. He grinned contentedly and got up to pat the dust off himself. Even if it had been a little difficult, he had succeeded in launching the web. At least the idea worked. He might now proceed to the next stage, using it regularly. But how could I do it again without risking my life? He could not afford to use the webbing by placing himself in such situations all the time. It had happened out of need and had been a reflex back then. Without that prior necessity, it would now have to be done knowingly. Naruto stepped a few feet from one of the smaller containers in the yard and said, I just have to calm myself and not put too much thought into it. He tried to keep his thoughts to himself and let his instincts guide him. He focused his concentration on the metal thing and directed his wrist at it. The sensation was intensifying, causing his wrist to twitch, his torso to tense, and then, in an instant, his fingers to bend and curl inward. A line of web sprang from his wrist and made contact with the container, producing the well-known twip sound. Looking at his wrist and admiring the webbing, the scarred blonde thought to himself, that went easier than I thought. A pleased smile came to his lips. He was learning how to do it. He thought he was, anyway. Although it had not been simple, the work thus far appeared to be worthwhile. The teenager tested the strength of his construct by tugging a little on the web's line. Seems pretty sturdy. In order to determine the precise strength of the web, the blonde dragged it in his direction while using additional force this time. He had surprisingly misjudged the strength he had invested in his draw. The container was torn from the earth and hurled in his direction with a loud, metallic clang. Oh shit! He effortlessly loosened the webbing and leaped over the falling container, just avoiding being struck by the metal object that slammed into the ground with a loud thud, stirring up dust and debris. He was left panting and experiencing a rush of adrenaline, exhilaration, and shock. He still hadn't gotten used to his sudden strength. Even though it wasn't as large as the usual ones, he was nonetheless shocked that he could toss such a huge object as if it were nothing. It was similar to this morning's door, but this time he was throwing a much bigger object. As he considered the boundaries of his strength, Naruto gazed down at his hands with a great deal of surprise, excitement, and admiration. Did he have boundaries at all? What else would he be able to do, or could he do? There are no answers to any of these queries. It was both exhilarating and frustrating. While keeping an eye on the still-running train tracks and checking his wrists, Naruto began to make his way back to his shipping container. The blonde teenager was cautious as he ran his thumb over his wrist, the strange feeling sending a shiver up his back. Naruto frowned and pointed his wrist outward, attempting to shoot another line of webbing like previously, but to no avail. After attempting to shake his wrist violently, Naruto tried hitting his hand with the flat side of his palm. Nothing. He complained that he didn't know why he couldn't activate the webbing, saying, "Here, I thought I'd figured it out. A minute ago, it had been successful." Naruto let out a defeated sigh and fixed his blue eyes on the cityscape as he gazed out over the wide horizon. "It's getting late. I guess I should head home." Disappointed, Naruto groaned and began to return to his cave, ignoring the swiftly passing train and focusing on his hands. Naruto made an effort to ignore his intellect and began paying more attention to his instincts and gut. He couldn't exactly explain why, but he pressed down firmly on a certain nerve with his middle and ring fingers, curling them into his palm. To Naruto's joyful surprise, a line of webbing emerged from his wrist. "I did it!" Naruto exclaimed, but his joy was short-lived because the scarred blonde who was rejoicing was regrettably hauled along for the ride as Naruto's webbing connected itself to the still-moving train. Naruto succeeded in removing his web from the train's side. Now that he was back in the city after being hauled along the train yard for 15 minutes, the scarred blonde was not returning home as he had intended. No, Naruto wanted to fully test his webs now that he had a basic understanding of how they operated. Naruto's idea was dangerous. Even though it was completely ridiculous to the average person, Naruto could only smile as his heart pounded like a drum while he stood on the roof of a building high enough to make him appear as nothing more than a large smudge on the ground. Never before had he felt so alive as he did now. Naruto moved to the edge of the building and exhaled a trembling, adrenaline-filled breath. Naruto took a trembling breath and said to himself, "This is insane. I'm gonna die. Oh God, what am I doing?" He exhaled slowly and shut his eyes. He briefly had only a sense of serenity and an instinctual, but strange, movement taking control. Naruto opened his eyes gradually and noticed that he was getting closer to the harsh pavement below. People who were going about their daily lives paused to stare up and gasp in fear, believing that the young man's life was about to end tragically and quickly. It was one thing to jump 50 feet from a crane, but it was quite another to jump from the highest building in New York City, which was at least 1,500 feet high. For Naruto, everything appeared to come together in the free-falling seconds. The sensation of weightlessness, the rush of air against his skin, and the way his pulse pounded so fast in his chest that it seemed like it might explode. Before they heard something rush past them, the people below were unaware of anything. Woohoo! People turned to face the yell, but all they could see was a figure speeding by them with a trail of white webbing in his wake. "What the hell?" exclaimed one man, gazing at the sky in disbelief. "Was that a guy or a bird? Are you blind, you idiot? That was obviously a guy." "What?" "It was a dude." Naruto was too far away to catch the passers-by's remarks, but it wouldn't have mattered to him at this point in time. Across the cityscape, the scarred blonde swung up and down with the string of web. As Naruto swung, he yelled, "Hoo!" as he sped between buildings and even through the streets, dodging past traffic. With each swing, he could feel his eagerness growing. There was no other event that could ever offer him the feeling of independence like this. He was so captivated and engaged by the sensation that he was unaware that many others were watching him glide around the city on a web of everything. They were too shocked by what they were witnessing, fortunately for the blonde, and by the time they regained their senses and pulled out their phones to document the sight, the blonde had long since vanished. Save for one fortunate individual. Despite the fact that it was a brand new, lovely day that was no different from others, Naruto found himself grinning, nodding, and waving at everyone he saw. The fact that yesterday was one of the most thrilling and amazing days of Naruto's life, or perhaps the fact that he got to see and spend time with the girl of his dreams, could be the explanation for his positive mood. The thought of his fellow blonde made Naruto appear foolish. He simply couldn't wait to meet Gwen once again. He felt a kind of anxiety at the prospect of them spending time together. Naruto was so engrossed in his reverie that he was unaware that he was facing the receptionist until she cleared her throat to get the teen's attention. In an embarrassed smile, Naruto said, "Gwen Stacy should be expecting me. It's, for the tour." The receptionist verified Naruto's assertion by looking at her computer. When she realized that Gwen had scheduled a tour, she told the teenager, "Just wait over there, and I'll call her down." Naruto read the engraved words with a sorrowful grin and then turned to gaze at the lovely garden centerpiece in the center of the Oscorp. "Thank you. In loving remembrance of Emily Osborne, a devoted scientist, wife, and mother." A recognizable voice cried out to the teen with the spider abilities, "Naruto, hey." Glancing over his shoulder, Naruto saw Gwen waved as she approached. The blonde turned to the victim of his desires and said, "Hey, Gwen." Gwen asked Naruto to follow her to the closest elevator, which was a shortcut to the lab, and said, "Are you ready for the tour?" Naruto admitted, "Yeah, I've been looking forward to it," as he and Gwen crammed themselves into the elevator and he watched her punch the button to send the lab to the floor. Naruto found the blonde endearing as she timidly brushed a stray lock behind her ear. "Me too," Gwen said, delightfully surprising him. They had reached Oscorp's cross-species genetics lab with a ding, Gwen leading the way. Naruto used this opportunity to admire the exquisite machinery and equipment that he had missed the first time. Additionally, Naruto saw that the box holding the freed spider was gone. Naruto followed Gwen throughout the lab until they reached a more peaceful section, where they were gazing at an exhibit with reptiles. "What happened to the spider exhibit?" he said. Gwen looked to Naruto and took a minute to enjoy his dazzling blue eyes before saying regretfully, "It seems the little guy managed to escape again. It's a shame, it was really unique." "Unique?" raised Naruto's eyebrows. Gwen's unsure expression piqued my interest more and more. Gwen firmly stated, "I really don't know much, but I do know it's meant to be a secret and not something you reveal to possible interns," as she felt herself get a little weaker in response to Naruto's sincere smile and beseeching eyes. Even though he was interested in the spider that bit him, Naruto promised, "I promise I won't tell anyone, but if you can't tell me anything, I understand," not wanting to get his crush into trouble or worse, fired. After giving the scarred blonde another look and appearing to consider it for a bit, Gwen sighed and said, "You're lucky. You're cute. Follow me." With a corny smile and slightly flushed cheeks, Naruto trailed behind Gwen, thinking to himself, "She thinks I'm cute." Naruto was brought by Gwen away from the CSGL and into a hallway that led to another hallway. The hallway had a large, high-tech, secured door and a lone guard with the name tag Alexei Sistovich on it. He was a big man with a mean face, broad shoulders, a shaven head, and an intimidating frame. "Who is this?" he said in a loud Russian accent, raising a harsh brow at Gwen and holding out his hand to stop Naruto from passing. "Just an upcoming intern, Mr. Sistovich," interrupted Gwen, who hurried to Naruto's defense. Alexei crossed his enormous arms and sneered, "Does he have permission to be here?" "Of course, he's with me. Dr. Connors just requested us to gather some samples for him," Gwen said, lying to the overbearing guard with ease. Alexei scowled and flexed his square jaw. He said. Specifically, he turned to face Naruto, who growled, "Do not cause any trouble." After saluting, the scarred youngster followed Gwen past the security door, which was suddenly unlocked. Their footsteps reverberated throughout the floor. Far down the hall, Naruto hardly had time to look at a chamber marked Military Division. Numerous enormous plates of metal, resembling unfinished armor, were strewn about the area behind a big window. Naruto found himself in a dark chamber with bright blue lights, leaving him little time to think on what he had seen. But what really caught the eye were the millions and millions of spiders scuttling up and down webs behind specially constructed containers. "Whoa!" Naruto said, somewhat mesmerized by the unsettling beauty created by the spiders and the lighting. Standing by Naruto, Gwen explained, "The spider that escaped came from this lab," pointing off the amazing webbing the confined arachnids had created. With his brow raised in confusion, Naruto questioned, "I thought you said it was unique?" "There's millions of spiders here. The reason it was so unique was because the spider was 1 in a billion, or at least that's what Dr. Connor said. He was really disappointed when we couldn't find it." Still curious about the spider that bitten him, Naruto tried to get more details from his fellow blonde by asking, "I still don't understand. What was so special about it?" "If I'm being completely honest, I don't know," Gwen shrugged and sighed. Scrunching up her nose in a way Naruto found just lovely, she took a minute to reflect. A little later, Gwen said simply, "But I do know there were decades of research dedicated to it." Walking across the lab until they returned to their starting point, the two fell into a cozy silence. "So, interested in becoming a fellow intern of Oscorp?" Gwen asked, smiling as she turned to face the scarred blonde. Naruto smiled back, scratching the back of his head with a shy expression. "Oh yeah, this place is amazing." The blonde realized that discovering more about the particular spider that bit him and gave him all these new, extraordinary talents would be a great opportunity for both his career and his education. When Gwen noticed Naruto's candor, her smile widened somewhat and she spoke. "That's great. I'm glad to hear that." "Yeah," Naruto obliged, at a loss for words. The scarred adolescent scowled at the idea of their time running out when Gwen said, "Well, it's getting late. I should probably get you back to the reception." Mid-walk, the boy called out to his crush, "Hey, Gwen," attracting her attention as she glanced at him over her shoulder. I'd love to do this again, you know." With a playful grin on her face, Gwen lifted one of her eyebrows. "You want another tour?" Shaking his head, Naruto quickly responded, "Oh no, I mean, not that I wouldn't want another tour like this. I liked it a lot, but I meant more of a hang-out together type thing." Fearful that he had said something incorrectly, he had to stop as Gwen slowed in her stride. "Was I being too direct with that?" As the seconds went by, perspiration began to trickle down his neck. Fortunately, as the girl smiled at him, he released a breath he was unaware he was holding. Gwen said, "That sounds like fun," as she swept her hair behind her ear as they approached the reception. The Russian bodyguard gave Naruto a suspicious look, but the teenager was too delighted to notice the stare. "I'll text you," Naruto said with a beaming smile. Gwen only said, still grinning at the blonde with the scars. "Sounds good." When they reached the receptionist's desk, they paused and noticed that there was a group of people seated around the TV that was mounted on the wall. Wondering what was going on, the two exchanged glances before gradually blending in with the throng. Video showing a figure hanging through the streets of New York City from strings of white webbing. "York," said the television reporter. Although the authorities are currently investigating, they are still unable to identify who or what this person is. Naruto stayed motionless as his mind attempted to comprehend the news and the video. When he realized they were referring to him, his face turned pale. "I was recorded yesterday by someone?" Gwen asked her fellow student. You think he's a mutant like those X-Men guys?" But when she didn't hear anything, she turned to see him staring at the television with his mouth open and his eyes fixed on it. "Naruto?" He turned to see her worried blue eyes as his crush's voice snapped him out of his daze. He recovered quickly, laughing nervously and shaking his head. "Sorry, I was thinking of something else." "You were saying?" he said. Gwen, who was still worried about the story, repeated her question. "I was wondering what you thought about the whole thing." Naruto shrugged and said, "Oh, I guess he's a mutant, or maybe it was one of those Avengers messing around," in an attempt to persuade her that, even though he was the one on screen, he didn't give a damn about the video. "I should probably head back home." Observing his strained and anxious state, Gwen concluded it would be best to let the blonde go. After receiving a brief nod in reply, she saw him speed out of the building and frown curiously as he said, "All right, I'll see you at school." The blonde beauty, who was trying to solve the riddle of Naruto Uzumaki, thought to herself, he seemed a little different than usual. Extraordinary. Gwen noticed Dr. Connors focusing on the TV when she looked over her shoulder. It's incredible how humanity has evolved. It wouldn't be the first time there were reports of someone displaying superhuman abilities, and I'm sure it won't be the last. Gwen, who was as astounded by what they were witnessing, nodded. "We have spider people now. I wonder what's next, reptile people? Or fish people?" After laughing at her remark, Dr. Connors looked at the television with what could be described as a mix of interest, envy, and calculation. Extraordinary indeed. The brilliant scientist stopped talking and turned to resume his job, leaving his helper to continue observing the newest happenings in New York among the other scientists.